Hey everyone, Scooby-Foo here. Remember Symmetry? Two taps in the Crucible, annoying as all heck in Gambit, for a primary weapon anyways, and never saw use in PvE because champion mods didn't work on exotics at the time. Let's look back at the weapon when it was released, see how it is now, and find out if this thing really deserves to be forgotten. First off, how does this thing even work? It's pretty simple. You get headshots to stack a dynamic charge. Hold your reload key to switch to the Arc Seeker mode, which will reload your weapon by one shot for every stack of dynamic charge you had beforehand, and you'll begin to fire Arc Seekers that deal increased damage for 10 seconds based off the amount of dynamic charge stacks you had beforehand. And once the 10 seconds are up, the damage will drop back to the base for the Seekers, which is very low. The Catalyst just increases the maximum stacks of dynamic charge you can have at once, and there's two final notes for the basics of the gun. 1. The reload stat is a trash 24, so if possible I'd suggest running at least one Scout Rifle loader mod, though I understand if you don't have any room thanks to all the artifact mods that go in your arms slot. 2. You can take as long as you want to build up dynamic charge stacks, and when you switch to another weapon you don't lose your stacks of dynamic charge. There is no Teraba curse here. Alright, let me teach you some history. Symmetry was the Season Pass exotic for Season of Dawn, and back then, mods like Anti-Barrier Scout, Unstoppable Bow, etc. were all mods that you had to apply directly to the weapon you wanted them on, instead of how they work now where you put them in your gauntlets. In short, this meant that if you had, say, Anti-Barrier Scout Rifle, you couldn't put it on Symmetry thanks to the lack of a mod slot. And as far as the PvE meta and endgame activities went, Xenophage had just gotten the 50% damage increase it had desperately needed, and Izanagi's Burden hadn't yet received the reload speed cap and 20% damage nerf for Honed Edge in Season of the Worthy, so the meta was almost entirely Izanagi's Burden or Xenophage for raids. Along with that, Grandmaster Nightfalls hadn't yet launched either, so even in the highest difficulty Nightfall, things died fairly quickly and you were better off running special or heavy exotics to burn champions down, rather than running an exotic primary that you couldn't even put a champion mod on. So yeah, between a meta that had no room for exotic primaries and no activities where ads took enough hits to warrant an exotic like Symmetry, it was left with two niche uses. In Gambit, you could stack up dynamic charge on the ads from your side of the arena, then go invade with your gun pre-charged, running around two-tapping people with Seekers that you barely even had to aim. It was pretty annoying at the time actually, though it was a nice little reprieve from what we had before, even if it was nothing compared to what would come. In the Crucible, and Gambit technically, the Seekers would 2-tap at 7 stacks of dynamic charge or higher, which meant that either after 2 gunfights or enough plinking away at people in the back, you could run in and most of the time get a free kill or two. It had its own problems in Crucible though. 260 RPM Scout Rifles are some of the worst for the mode, especially considering that 150 RPM hand cannons still existed at the time and were completely dominating the Crucible. Snipers were also a constant threat if you took the more passive approach to stacking dynamic charge, since all it takes from them is one shot to down you while you're trying to get 7 headshots without being shotgun rushed, killed by a spare ration, supered, killed by the heavy ammo they got 10 seconds ago, etc., so on and so forth. History lesson over. These days you get Symmetry from the Exotic Archive in the tower, and the Catalyst comes from Banshee. You barely ever see it in Gambit or Crucible, and I don't think I've seen anyone using it in PvE in at least 6 months. I think that qualifies as being forgotten. Let's pull this thing from the vault and see what we can do with it in Season of the Splicer. Gambit and Crucible first, since those areas haven't changed much since the original release of this thing. I've been using it in Gambit every now and then since I've made a rule for myself to only invade with primary or special ammo, and I gotta say, maybe it's just catching people off guard since you don't see it often, but it still works. You can sorta help with reaping ads on your side since you can safely plink away to get dynamic charge while staying near the invasion portal. Running a shotgun allows you to clear blockers since you'll be near them anyways. And with enough dynamic charge stacks, you'll even 2-tap invaders themselves, letting it work as an anti-invader weapon too. That's not to say it's the be-all, end-all, best Gambit weapon in existence, though. Invading with other heavy weapons is still your best bet, reaping is best done with other exotics, and a good sniper shot will still take an invader out faster. Symmetry can be considered a jack-of-all-trades, with a slight specialty for invading in Gambit. In the Crucible, Symmetry has a base time to kill in line with all other rapid-fire scouts at 3 crit 2 body, giving it a fairly easy to acquire but somewhat slow optimal time to kill of 0.93 seconds, and the body shot time to kill is 1.4 seconds at 7 body shots. One thing to note about the 0.93 second time to kill is that it is faster than 120 RPM hand cannons, which have a 1 second optimal time to kill and as far as most gunfights go, the same range as Symmetry. Now, if you have 7 stacks or more when you switch to the Arc Seeker mode, you'll be able to 2-tap any resilience level at roughly 90 to 95 RPM, giving you a time to kill of around 0.67 seconds that's brain dead easy to achieve, since the Arc Seekers home in and only deal body shot damage, practically no aiming required. For slower-paced players, I think Symmetry has some potential in the Crucible, but also very well could end up getting outgunned by 140 RPM hand cannons like the Palindrome, outflinched by 120 RPM hand cannons like the Igneous Hammer, and will have some issues in close-range combat thanks to its 20 zoom stat. For comparison, Igneous Hammer has 14 zoom and Deadman's Tale has 18. PvE strikes, Nightfalls, dungeons, and raids. Also Lost Sectors. I'm mainly going to be focusing on Nightfalls and Lost Sectors here, since you can do whatever the hell you want in strikes, and unless you're in a boss encounter, the same goes for dungeons and raids most of the time. So, could, or should, you use Symmetry in a Legend, Master, or Grandmaster Nightfall? Assuming there's a champion mod for Scout Rifles, it kinda depends for Grandmasters. For the super hard ball-busting ones like the Corrupted, Proving Grounds, or Glassway, you might want to stick to the meta loadouts for those. But if we're talking Arms Dealer, Warden of Nothing, stuff like that, you absolutely can, and while it may not be as fast as the meta you know and maybe love, it will work. For Legend and Master Nightfalls, I'd say you can just go right on ahead for any of them. Symmetry deals very respectable DPS if you have high stacks of Dynamic Charge. I don't think it'll let you down. For Legend Lost Sectors, go right on ahead. I was running it with Anti-Barrier and it was working well. No problems at all killing barrier champions in one activation of Revolution, and while Overloads and Unstoppables are somewhat annoying to keep stunned or overloaded while doing DPS with Symmetry if it only has Anti-Barrier, it did still work. Oh, and I've been talking about using Revolution to kill champions and stuff this whole time, but if you decide to use your Dynamic Charge stacks to kill ads instead, red bars will die to 2 to 3 Seekers in GMs and should die to 1 hit in all other activities, so long as you've got sufficient stacks of Dynamic Charge. As far as builds go, Hunters can get the most use out of Symmetry thanks to Mask of Bakris providing 2 10% damage modifiers, one for arc weapons and one for any weapon against a target affected by stasis. If you want a deeper dive on how Bakris works, I have a video for that and Athreus' Embrace. All you need to know for now is that after you dodge with Mask of Bakris and Stasis on, you'll get both damage modifiers for Symmetry if you slow or freeze the enemy. Duskfield grenades are best for the job since they can repeatedly freeze and keep a champion slowed. Since we're running Stasis, I'd suggest Touch of Winter and Grim Harvest for your aspects, and Whisper of Hunger, Durance, Conduction, and Shards for your fragments. I would suggest running High Energy Fire to stack with all this. Your simplest mod setup for that would be Stacks on Stacks, Taking Charge, Supercharged, High Energy Fire, and either Precision Charge if you want more charge with light stacks, or Protective Light for safety. That'll all require 2 Void Armor pieces, 1 Solar, and 2 of any element. As well, it's a good thing we just got a grenade launcher in our kinetic slot again, because in Season of the Splicer, we have the artifact mod Breach and Clear, which lets us apply a debuff to an enemy by damaging them with any grenade launcher. Though, if you run this, you'll have to replace one of your Charge with Light mods. I would suggest replacing Precision Charge with Shield Break Charge, but we'll talk more about Charge with Light in a second. Adding all of our buffs, modifiers, and debuffs, you can potentially deal up to 88% increased damage. Pretty nice. As for Warlock and Titan, they don't have one specific exotic you should run for Symmetry. Any generic build like Phoenix Cradle and Sunspots for Titan, or Boots of the Assembler and Well for Warlock will work. And in general, you can pair Symmetry with any DPS heavy weapon. I'll be using a rocket launcher. Now, if you want to run this in a Nightfall, we'll have to change up our mods a bit. Instead of the setup mentioned before for Hunter, you'll want to run Taking Charge, High Energy Fire, and Stacks on Stacks specifically in your helmet, chest, and boots. In your gloves, run Charged Up, and in your cloak, run Shield Break Charge. The reason for these changes is that you'll be running Anti-Barrier Scout Rifle and Unstoppable Grenade Launcher in your gloves, and Breach and Clear in your cloak, both of which will add up to costing exactly 10 energy with the other mods in those armor pieces. In your other armor pieces, just run usual Resist, Scavenger, Finder, and stat mods based on what you need, focusing Discipline, Recovery, and Mobility for stats. For Warlocks, you have Empowering Rifts for gaining a damage buff, so the changes to your armor mods will be removing High Energy Fire and Stacks on Stacks, and replacing those with Protective Light and an Ammo Finder, Scavenger, or stat mod depending on what you want. For Warlocks, you'll want to focus on Recovery, Discipline, and, if you're running Stasis, Strength. And for Titans, if you're running a tree that doesn't have a damage buff like Middle Tree Sentinel, there will be no changes to your mod setup from Hunters. However, if you're running Bottom Tree Sunbreaker, you'll have damage buffs aplenty. So my suggestion would be to replace High Energy Fire with Firepower for even more grenade uptime. For Titans, you'll be focusing on Discipline, Recovery, and Resilience. A section for the number freaks. Against Majors, Symmetry deals 9,333 headshot DPS in its normal mode, and between 2,809 to 19,656 DPS depending on the amount of dynamic charge stacks you have. Notably, it takes about 10 stacks or more for the Revolution DPS to actually be higher than your normal DPS just shooting at the head, so I wouldn't bother switching to Revolution until then. If you get all the buffs up on Hunter, you can deal up to 28,000 DPS for the 10 seconds that the Revolution buff is active, or even up to 37,000 DPS if you have Breach and Clear active, which is pretty dang good for a primary, considering that a Godroll Ikelos SR does 47,000 DPS over one magazine before buffs, modifiers, and debuffs. So yeah, Symmetry is viable in some fashion in pretty much every activity, never exceeding at anything in specific, but almost always usable. A true jack of all trades, master of none. I like it though. In GMs or other Nightfalls and Lost sectors, it's a fun change from the usual setups. You can definitely see success using it in Gambit, and it can work in the Crucible. But if you're looking to try something different in whatever activity you're doing, try Symmetry. It won't let you down. Probably. That's it for now though. If you enjoyed this review of a forgotten weapon, consider obliterating the like button and gently love tapping the subscribe button as well. Join the Discord and follow me on Twitter if you want to know when I'm going live or post a new video. Assuming I get this out before Season of the Splicer, that didn't happen. I've been Scooby Foo, thank you for watching.